All right, I'm Doug White, and it's the Security Weekly News, episode 236. Welcome to the week of 28 August 2022. We've got PS5s, Twilio, Quantum, bug bounties galore, a date bomb, backups, Sephora, and Jason Wood on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Who loves you, baby? It's the Security Weekly News. So, Okta's got bed bugs. I mean, everything just keeps coming back around on this, and this story just won't stop. And like bed bugs, they can't get rid of it. So apparently, there's a new problem for them. An actor behind the Twilio attack. So the Twilio attack actor used the access they had to Twilio to steal one-time passwords, which are delivered over the Twilio service via SMS from customers of Okta Identity and Access Management. So here we go again. Apparently, the attacker could see the mobile numbers and the one-time passwords that belong to Okta customers on the Twilio console, which, of course, would imply that the actor had access to the Twilio console, which they did. So on the 4th of August, Twilio, which is a cloud communications company, if you didn't know, found out that an unauthorized party had gained access to their systems. At least that's what they say. Okta was using a Twilio-provided service which allowed for SMS authentication as a second factor for customers who requested, that particular service. So on the 8th of August, Okta learned that the hack of Twilio, which we've talked about before, had exposed, quote, unspecified data relevant to Okta, end quote. So, so they basically said, it's not a big deal. But they immediately started using a different provider for their SMS verification. Twilio then provided internal system logs to Okta, and Okta analyzed them and determined that the bad guy had access to the mobile phone numbers and one-time password codes associated with those mobile phone numbers, which belong to their customers. So the one-time passwords only exist for about 5 minutes. So they're not like long-term threats, but they do allow you time to log in, change things, and boom, you got big problems. Okta said the intruder specifically searched for 38 phone numbers, which were all associated with a single organization, which would imply that obviously that they were targeting that particular company. The search was conducted using Twilio admin portals. So the person was in Twilio, they were on the admin portal, and they basically said they could see the most recent 50 messages delivered through the Okta Twilio account. So despite being able to see a lot of total phone numbers, the attackers ignored them. They went right after these 38 accounts. So this week, Twilio announced that the investigation had revealed that the hacker accessed Authy two-factor accounts, AUTHY. So Authy two-factor accounts and registered the attacker's devices to receive a one-time password. So this is an old tactic, right? If you can get in, you change the security codes, you change where everything is forwarded to, the email address, and so forth. And then no matter how many times a person logs in and resets their password, you can log right in and do the same thing. So Okta has identified the group doing that this group was doing multiple phishing campaigns targeting multiple tech companies, and they named them Scatter Swine, which I guess is something about scattering pearls before swine or something, but Scatter Swine. So Scatter Swine is also apparently behind the Octopus phishing campaign that we talked about last week, and that was reported by Group IB about that Octopus thing. So its apparent goal is to grab Okta credentials and two-factor codes for other people that are using the Okta service. So far, Scattered Swine has stolen close to 1,000 logins, according to this report. using these phishing campaigns. So it's a tough one. Because defending against this type of social engineering attack will always be a challenge. OCTA advises to use network zones to increase examination of rarely used networks, restrict access to applications to only registered devices, and restrict access to sensitive applications and data using application-specific authentication policies. Okay, all good advice. I mean, this is stuff that you should be doing anyway. I think there's a lot more here, and there's a lot more in this story as well than we're going to cover here. So it's probably worth your reading. CISA issued one of those warnings that everyone will likely ignore since it's not an immediate impact to anyone. They basically said, that people should be preparing for quantum computing rather than waiting for the attackers to have access to quantum computing and attack them. Wow, that makes pretty good sense. But we as a species are not very good with this kind of long-range thinking typically, since we tend to deny first and then wait for the fires to start rather than, buy a fire extinguisher and stuff like that. I mean, look at climate change. We've been denying that for years, right? I mean, of course, considering that there's people out there that literally believe the earth is flat or hollow and filled with lemon custard, well, I don't hold out much hope for the human race anyway. Now, this warning does sound a lot like when they started saying, we really ought to start pumping all this coal smoke into the air that we need to breathe. And people said, I love the smell of coal smoke in the morning. But CISA said that despite quantum not being commercially available now, it will be. And when it is, well, there goes the neighborhood, because quantum will likely be able to break all current encryption very, very quickly. So that means the minute somebody gets access to quantum, they can start breaking encryption. And, that'll be the day when we then have to form a government commission to look at it, which will take 19 years. So they published a paper yesterday which called for leaders to start preparing for the migration to better secret guarding systems, better risk mitigation methods, and to be involved in the development of new standards. It's a noble call, but I doubt many people are going to get on board. I wish you would. Please do. If you're out there and you're listening and you're a CEO or you're a CIO or whatever, start getting involved in this stuff. Many experts believe that this is going to happen before the end of this decade, so we need to start preparing now. CISA has a complete roadmap for stakeholders in the article, which include things like identification of standards, which will require updating and so forth. All good advice. It's a good paper to read. I actually thought it was worthwhile. It's actually good advice for everything, regardless of quantum. My cynical self believes we'll get started in this about an hour too late, assuming climate change hasn't already, put us all underwater and the whole place looks like Arrakis by then, which would be the opposite of being underwater. But, sandworms are kind of cool from a distance. But yeah, okay. Google has opened a bug bounty for Google released open source software called Google OSS. The vulnerability reward program is focused on Google software and repository settings. It will apply to any software available from public repositories that Google owns, like GitHub and other GitHub organizations that Google controls, and some other repositories are also included in the scope. The particular focus of this bug bounty is on security vulnerabilities in third-party dependencies and has the condition that all the bug findings have to first be sent to the package owners before you inform Google. So that gives them a chance to fix it. The top awards are for the most sensitive project: Bazel, Angular, Golang, protocol buffers, and Fuchsia, according to Google. The final rewards will range from $100 to $31,337 and I saw that number and I was immediately like, why do I know that number? That's an odd. Oh yeah, it's elite. So that's the code for elite. If you weren't aware of that, I actually was aware of it. I just didn't think about it at first. I was like, what an odd amount. And then I was like, wait, that means something, because I'm obsessed with numbers that mean things. And I stop freeze frame shows and look at the house numbers and the mailbox numbers and things to see if they may have secret meanings. Yeah, Rick and Morty is secretly trying to communicate you through the numbers in the show. Trend Micro's Zero Day Initiative has announced also that they have a new Pwn2Own competition as well, since we're on the topic of bug bounties and such. They added a new category this year as well, which will try to simulate real-world home office environments. So the next Pwn2Own will be the 6th through the 8th of December, and it's being held in Toronto, Canada. And the registration deadline is the 2nd of December. ZDI, who runs this, said they will be reimbursing you up to $3,000 in travel expenses because there was not a con running at the same time this year. So they're actually going to pay people to come to Toronto, which is a great place. If you've never been to Toronto, I would encourage you to go there. or Toronto, as they say. There is an option to participate remotely, but you can't get the money. And you also have to let ZDI execute your code for you, but they did have that option. There are more than $1 million in cash and prizes for exploits which target mobile phones, wireless routers, home automation hubs, smart speakers, printers, and NAS devices. And this new category is called Soho Smash Up, which sounds like a party with Lou Reed, but you get the idea. And yes, I know that Lou and Lori did not live in Soho. They lived in the West Village. Thank you very much. But, close enough for government work. And I know if you have to explain the joke is you, yada, 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 whatever. Anyway, check out the newest Pwn2Own for fun and possibly profit to yourself if you can find some vulnerabilities. An old-fashioned data bomb. Old-fashioned date bomb. Why, I don't know. I say data so much. An old-fashioned date bomb idea is repurposed. These things are awful. One of the first consulting jobs I ever did in my life was a date bomb. A company called me and they said, all of our screens in our company now say, Sean has not been paid. And Sean was a developer who had voluntarily left the company and moved on, and they couldn't find him. And I guess he had built a date bomb into his software that if he didn't put a code in every so many days, which we figured out later, it was going to wipe the drives and it was counting down. It was a really intense consulting job. It was actually pretty easy to stop, but it was very intense when I walked in there and like all their screens are going, ticking down. Remember Michelangelo? It was a really old, really early piece of internet malware that was a date bomb. That if you had it on your machine, it supposedly was waiting until I think it was the birthday of Michelangelo to detonate. I don't remember all the grim details. That was another one that I did a bunch of response on. Well, this new campaign is disguised as Google Translate or other MP3 downloader program, and it delays execution of its malware components for a while. And obviously, this is to throw you off the scent after you've downloaded these apps and prevent them from being detected and identified. The date bombs are found in packages that were created by a user called NitroCod. And they make, or the individual, make various add-ons for Google Translate and other things, and they're often pretty high up in Google search results. NitroCod's Google Translate applet was uploaded on Softpedia and had over 100,000 downloads as of the writing of this article. The program itself is a RAR that you download, just like any kind of other package, and it has pseudo-legitimate stuff in it. I guess it's actually legitimate. It just happens to have a little problem in the background. And basically, you run it to install it on Google, as you like. On the 5th day after you've installed it, a wget is issued, and that downloads a dropper that is another encrypted RAR. And so the software then clears all your logs. It uses PowerShell, and then it waits for 15 more days. So it clears all the logs that all this stuff was downloaded and installed, waits 15 more days before it goes and grabs another encrypted RAR, this one from a domain called intelserviceupdate.com. That dropper then runs on your system, looks for anti-malware apps and tips to avoid them. It also searches for processes which might look like virtual machines to make sure it's, I guess, not in a virtual machine or a honeypot or whatever. And it adds a firewall rule to exclude itself from Windows Defender. Yow. Then it waits again. So that setup sits there then. After it's done all that, it again waits so you won't have this in your logs. And then it goes back and it finally does a final download, which is another RAR that contains XMRig mining malware, a controller for that, and a config file, a .sys file. And once that happens, it connects up to a command and control server at NVIDIAcenter.com, uploads a whole host system report to that. Then the command and control server downloads more config information to tell it how often to run, how much CPU to use, and keeps it operating, attempting to be very, very subtle. So it's definitely something that I don't like, but I kind of like it at the same time. It was a very elaborate and elegant thing, and it's a little scary too, right? Because now you got to date bombs always make everybody pretty nervous because you're going, wow, that could be running on my machine right now, and I just didn't know it, and it's about to go off. I did put this little short story in. It's a nice thing to put more lines on your already furrowed brow. But the article starts off being about a guy named Boyle back in the 80s who was working on a COBOL invoicing system and developed a plan to make backups that went, I guess, pretty wrong. The instructions say copy the live fixed drive to a blank removable, then copy the live removable down to the fixed drive, then copy the new fixed up to the blank removable, copy the backup fixed now on a removable back down to the fixed. If you read it, it's like, it looks like simple steps, and you're going, wait, what did he just say to do? I mean, I think what he said to do makes sense, but apparently this complex backup plan confused people, and they didn't implement it. So they thought they were doing it, and they had a plan on the books, and they had a binder and all this kind of stuff, but then they let it slide. So they didn't do it, and eventually they needed the backups, and well, guess what? They hadn't been doing them, so they didn't have them. I have responded to these kind of cases on a couple of different occasions. The moral here is, of course, that these guys were okay because it was the 1980s and they had paper records, so they could just rebuild, right, from literally paper. And I did one of those once. They lost their entire accounting system, and they had been backing it up on a tape drive that actually hadn't been used in more than 2 years. They said they did it. They had the tape drive. They had tapes in the tape drive, but nobody ever did it. And when I checked, there was nothing there. But they did have paper records, and it took them several complete weeks with multiple accountants working to re-enter all of their transactions back into their accounting system once I had rebuilt the server and reinstalled the software. They weren't real happy with me because they thought I was going to do some magic trick to make stuff that never existed appear, but unfortunately I couldn't. So this is a good story to read. It should make you sleep a bit restlessly, worry a bit about quantum, and then tomorrow you should test your backup approach. And I mean really test it, like do some restores and so forth, because people always say they test their backups, which means they go, do we have a backup in place? And everybody goes, yeah, we're good. But you need to test it, and you need to test the restore process, really. If you don't, you're going to be sorry one day. Sephora has agreed to pay $1.2 million to settle claims it violated privacy laws in the state of California. Now, unfortunately, the United States has very, very limited privacy protections for individuals. But California and some other states have begun implementing bigger controls of privacy within their state confines, which with the internet, it gets really confusing. It's like GDPR, right? It's really hard to say who's affected by this because it supposedly applies to the EU. But, yeah. So this is one of the first cases where they're going to test this state law. And the law attempts to prevent online merchants from collecting and selling information about you based on what you do on their site. So Sephora is a multinational purveyor of makeup. And according to the claims, they did not notify customers that they were collecting information about them. Now, apparently, they did have an opt-out, and it was listed, but they did not process those opt-outs. They just said, yeah, click here, and you can opt out. Sure, right. It's kind of like those emails where they say if you'd like to unsubscribe, and no matter how much you unsubscribe, they just seem to subscribe. You don't, yeah. But anyway, and they did somehow distribute this data. So this is kind of what the court case is about. They didn't exactly sell it, but that's what the case came down to. So they went on to say that this global privacy control signal, which is something that has been bandied about, it's essentially a button that you should be able to click and opt out of everything. But they said that they had this in California and it was ignored. Sephora granted third-party companies, this is what they did. They granted third-party companies, including advertising networks and data analytics, access to the customer's online activities, not for cold hard cash, but in exchange for advertising and other services. So they let you in and you put their ads on your site. Not a cash transaction, but it's still, this is what they went to court about. Is that selling data? So it was all about this word sale of information, and when is it being sold, when is it being traded for other services, and so forth. But the agreement will allow this to be applied more stringently, and the finding by the court means that they can start going after people. Hopefully other states like Rhode Island, please, will adopt these laws soon, and maybe the U.S. federal government will adopt some of this soon to try to protect consumers from this kind of crap. Before his career in cyber, he started working the geek circuit, and I don't mean programming. After attending Captain Spaulding's Geek and Clown School, learned to geek and clown with the best of them. Penn Jillette once said, what? Oh, him? Yeah, he's a geek, like that kind of geek. Yeah. So please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. Here to geek out a little bit more with you, I guess. Today, I found a report by Threat Post that I thought it would be of interest to everybody, and I wanted to bring up. Basically, the report is on TA423, or otherwise known as Red Red Laden, and an intrusion campaign that they're actually conducting right now against targets in Australian government and energy companies with operations in the South China Sea. Now, I always like these reports where they get into how an attacker is actually operating, what it is they're doing, even if they're speculating or having to guess about a little bit about where this may go or things like that. We're still getting a lot of information about how the attackers operate themselves. So that's why I decided to, I like I said, these always catch my attention right away. So the original article came from Threat Post. However, there's a link to the source report that was released today by Proofpoint and PricewaterhouseCoopers in combination with each other. So what has Red Laden been up to lately? Well, Red Laden itself is reported to be a very active group in the Ministry of State Security in the People's Republic of China. They've been active since roughly 2013 and are reported to be located in the Hainan province of China. Now, like I said, this campaign is focused on Australian government and energy companies in and around Malaysia or around the South China Sea. Particular, they seem to be interested in anyone doing the extraction and export of natural gas from the area. The campaign itself is actually pretty straightforward. These are things that we've talked about for quite a while, but now you're getting to see how it's actually used by an attacker. The threat actor themselves, they sent out malicious emails to websites that are masquerading or pretending to be legitimate news websites. The site that the victim ends up on basically has news articles that they've copied from other existing news sites. So they give an example of the malicious website with a story about Australia, and they show that this story was taken from the BBC, for example, and just implemented there. However, in addition to the news, it's also serving up a JavaScript recon and intrusion framework that has been named Scanbox. Now, I'll be honest, when I read about Scanbox's capabilities, it reminded me a lot of Beef, the browser exploitation framework. Scanbox can do a lot of similar functionality. I'm sure there are going to be differences between the two because one is meant to be a demonstration tool. The other one is meant to actually carry out operations. So Scanbox in itself is much more targeted at allowing that adversary to accomplish their mission. Now, primarily, this is information gathering. It can collect information about the operating system, the browser type and version that you have running, that you're using on the system, or to interact with the site, extensions that are installed into the browser, connectivity to command and control servers, and things like that. It can also do some checks for security software on the host and perform some level of key logging on the victim. So they can start up this key logging module and, to an extent, capture some keystrokes that the user may be typing into the system. Now, in the past, I've used these similar types of attacks during penetration tests, and I have found these to be really successful. In fact, one of the things that kind of caught me off guard, and it probably shouldn't, given by the number of browser tabs I have open, but it's just how long a victim may stay active on the site. One of my colleagues came up with a great idea for a pretext to use in a campaign that we were doing. And so we got that together, we put it out there, and we got an extremely high number of hits back on it. One of the things that surprised me was how long people would stay on this for hours. When we shut down the C2 system, 48 hours later, we still had a number of folks who were still connected and that we could still interact with. So, this gives a pretty good window of opportunity to the attackers. And, one of the benefits of this attack is we're not actually, at least with that initial request, deploying any kind of DLL or EXE or anything like that to disk. We just, this just gets loaded up in the browser and gets executed. Depending on how they decide to implement the attack, they can use this to get some pretty significant access. And now, is it necessarily game over if somebody falls for this? Well, no. I mean, it is an initial foothold, and it's something to be to gather a lot of information out of the environment. However, they can, just with the next step of saying, okay, well, now that we've had them on the site, let's prompt them to download something and then execute that. And that, potentially could open you up to the attacker up to some discovery at that point. But if they decide that the victim is interesting, as they looked at their system and the whole bit and who they are, it's okay, this is somebody that we want to go after a little bit further. Let's go ahead and send them a malicious file to execute. And, with the right lure and idea behind that, people are happy to click through on that, even though we constantly are telling folks, don't do this. The phishing messages themselves, as you're looking at them in the proof point report, really appeals to the victim's desire to be helpful. Basically saying, hey, I'm standing up this new website to do news. Please take a look, provide me with some feedback on my new, and this is a quote, humble news site, end quote. The link that they put into the email actually has the URL parameters in there. It includes two integers in it, basically. The first one, integer, identifies the campaign that is being used for this in this URL, and then the second one is a victim ID for them to track along. Now, anytime I see integers like this, I want to start playing around with it and see what else I can find out is going on. But of course, you'd be messing with adversary infrastructure, so your mileage may vary there. Be sure you, if you ever do that, to set things up to appropriately protect yourself and not expose yourself at all. The Proofpoint PwC report also includes a lot more information about different parameters that this C2 infrastructure has a capability to use and send things back to the JavaScript framework to then turn around and execute. One thing that caught me a little bit off guard as I was reading this, and then it started to make sense as I read through a little bit more carefully, is that they are referring back to an earlier bit of reporting on a campaign that was going on by Red Ledon, where they were delivering malicious RTF documents to the victims, which would then deploy malicious code to the victim systems. So basically, the suspicion here is they're tying this latest activity back to that RTF campaign, which makes sense. They're talking about same domain names are being used to do the delivery and things like that. In spite of that little bit of confusion on my part, I think both articles are really good to read. I've got the link to both of them in the show notes. Frequently, we are reading about different vulnerabilities and potential avenues of attack. And, we end up wondering a little bit, okay, you're talking about this vulnerability. How would it be used? It's kind of a, we've discovered this, but nobody's actually executing it in the wild that we know of, or at least not in that article that they're talking about, that vulnerability. In this case, we're getting a view into what an attacker is actually doing. Is it the most terribly exciting method of exploitation? No, it's really not. But it is interesting is to see here's what they're doing. This is how an adversary is actually operating. And so I'm always interested in that bit of information. And how would that play out against my defenses? What am I prepared for in this scenario if one of my users were to get hit with that? If you aren't in Australia or the South China Sea, you might be inclined to go ahead and discard this information and say, well, it doesn't target me. But, this is, I don't think that's a good idea. Just don't do that. This is an example of one campaign. This can be and is, they already have in that, I mentioned that parameter where they have an integer identifying which campaign they're using. They have multiple campaigns going on. So it could be targeting your geolocation or your industry. And so this is something to need to think about and be prepared for. The threat post article itself gives a good high-level overview of the campaign, whereas the Proofpoint PwC report gets much more detail. They include a number of IOCs that are available and some great detail on the campaign itself, including things like the email sent, code that was involved in it, and a review of Red Ledon's activity over time. So go ahead and take a look at this, see what you think about it. Like I said, I find this always very interesting when we get an insight into what our adversaries are up to.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And finally, apparently Sony announced a price hike for PlayStation 5 in some markets, Europe, the UK, China, Australia, Mexico, and Canada, not the US. But interesting. Can you even buy a PS5 anywhere? I was very interested in this article. They were talking about PS5s and it being revised and whatever. And I was like, I don't think you can even buy these things. I mean, think about it. They put this thing out in 2020. Good luck getting one even today. I mean, the supply chain issues, the pandemic, and all this stuff came into play on this, and you really can't get one. And if you do find one for sale, it's usually like $800 or $900 over the, over the retail price. I mean, I've never seen one for sale. You see all these notices about how you might be able to get one and so forth and so on. But I've never actually seen one that was available for sale since 2020. I mean, I looked, and so I saw they're releasing a lighter version of it, so it's like not got as, I don't know, it doesn't weigh as much, I guess was what it meant. But considering that you have to bring in an ear and a toe from some random person to even get a PS5 without going through some scalper. And any rumor of a suspected PS5 being for sale somewhere results in like either a literal or a virtual mob scene. I don't think the price hike is going to do much except maybe cut into the scalpers' profits, but they'll just pass that along, right? So now instead of it being $900 for a $399 gaming platform, it'll be $950 for the platform. But you still can't get it, but hey, we're gonna jack the price up some more. I mean, I'm just gonna stick with my Atari 2600. Thank you very much. But seriously, if you want to send me a PS5 as a gift or something, I wouldn't turn it down. And that is the news. Thanks, Jason. See you Friday for the wrap-up show.